music. Like I was just, my friend just yesterday was like, "Hey, what's going on?" I live in Arizona. I live in Scottsdale. And she was like asking for fun things to do. And so I said, hiking's really good right now. And then I said, but it sucks that there's no concerts. Like it really sucks. It's a huge loss that there aren't concerts.
Well, I was reading something recently that, the last global pandemic was in 1918.
Right. Spanish
You
flu,
know,
right?
yeah. And a lot of, I guess, historians or anthropologists think that the Roaring Twenties was actually a response to that pandemic. That like basically in 1917, 1918, 1919, 1920, apparently like the world was even more shut down than it is now.
Really?
Well, because just think of it like they didn't have phones. They didn't have,
Yeah.
like everything. I mean, all jobs were in-person jobs back then. So like when that pandemic waned, apparently people just went crazy, and that's where the Roaring Twenties came from. So I heard someone saying like, get ready because it's about to happen again. Like once this pandemic abates or ends, I feel like people are just going to rush to concert venues, to nightclubs, to
Totally.
bars, to restaurants, to anything. Like, I mean, I'm old and kind of misanthropic, and I like being by myself. So I don't know if I'll be rushing.
You
And I'm
totally,
sober,
you're
so I'm
going to be
certain.
playing. You're going to be doing it. You're going to be entertaining us. You're going to
And
reprise number two.
yeah, one of my only issues, I don't really like, I love playing live music, but I really don't like touring
Mm-hmm. How
because I
come?
guess I did it for too many years
Oh,
and it just got too repetitive. So now, like, most of the performing I do, well, pre-pandemic was, at charity fundraisers, friends parties. Like, I'd much rather walk down the street with an acoustic guitar and play some songs in someone's backyard than go on tour for 6 months.
I have a
I'm
nice
walking
backyard.
walking from LA to Scottsdale. That would be a little of a bit of a challenge. Like crossing the desert with my acoustic guitar. I feel like that would be a good. There's a good movie in that.
We can meet at Coachella for a little tiny concert.
Yeah. Scottsdale, is that in Arizona? Is that more towards the north or the south?
It's really right where Phoenix is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is there? Because I still remember, and this has nothing to do with almost anything we're talking about. But the first tour I ever did, we had 2 days off after a show in Phoenix, and so a bunch of friends and I rented a car and drove to the Grand Canyon because we'd never been to the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm. Way
And I
cool.
remember one of the most remarkable experiences. We left Phoenix, and it was in February. We left Phoenix, and it was like 68 degrees. And an hour later, I think we drove over this thing called Mount Moriah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a real thing, or am I miss?
Well, you probably drove up to Flagstaff.
We eventually got to Flagstaff, but I just remember like leaving Phoenix, going up a mountain, and all of a sudden there's 10 feet of snow everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens in Arizona is a lot of times people get a house there for the summer, in the summer, have an extra house because it's 120 degrees in Scottsdale or Phoenix. And then they go to Flagstaff area where it's like 8,000 foot, 8 to 12,000. I mean, it goes up to 12,000 feet where the top of the mountain is. But about 8,000 feet, and it's 20 plus degrees cooler. Yeah. So they
Yeah,
get
I mean,
tons of snow too.
the West Coast, because I grew up in Connecticut and New York, and what you're describing, that just doesn't exist anywhere on the East Coast or the Midwest. And like when I first came out here, I live in LA now,
Yeah.
and I realized, like, oh, I live in LA, it's 72 degrees, but if I drive for 2 hours, I can be in 10 feet of snow and it's 20 degrees. That is just, it's still mind boggling to me.
I mean, look, it seems like everyone's leaving California. Maybe you want to come to Arizona.
The 120-degree summers might be a little hard to deal with.
Well, I understand. That's okay. Turns out there's plenty of space everywhere for everyone. So you have a doc coming out too. I feel like you've been super busy, and I just love the name of it, Moby Doc. That's fantastic. Why did you decide to do a doc?
Well, it's interesting. I hope it's interesting. And it ties back to what we've been talking about, because as you know, there are a lot of biopics, documentaries about writers, artists, directors, musicians, public figures. And one of the things I think I've learned over time is, that, and I apologize for repeating myself, but that the human condition can't be fixed with fame. It can't be fixed with money. It can't be fixed with possessions. And so the documentary is largely, I think, the goal was to make something unique and idiosyncratic that looks at that issue. Like using me as the test subject almost, like how I tried to fix, so many, psychological things with fame or money or, validation or materialism. And not surprisingly, it didn't work. So that's the idea behind the documentary, to show that, you can't fix yourself with fame and stuff.
Well, you said the more successful you got, essentially the more alone you felt, right? Or the worse you felt.
Which I think, it's funny because we're still surprised when people have that experience, but almost everybody has that experience. Like just recently there was the Meghan Markle interview with Oprah. She's a princess hanging out in Buckingham Palace and she's despondent and wants to kill herself. And we're all so surprised by that, but yeah, that happened to Diana too. And it happened to Kurt Cobain, and it happened to Ernest Hemingway, and it happened to Avicii, and it happened to Robin Williams, and on and on and on. Like really, and I'm not complaining or looking for sympathy, but as you probably know firsthand, like fame should come with a warning label. Just beware. Like you think fame is going to fix things, but boy, oh boy, it just doesn't.
I love, I think maybe it's Jim Carrey. I'm sure plenty of people kind of said this various sort of thing, but Jim Carrey, I wish everyone could get rich and famous so they could realize that it's not that's not the be all end all. That's not going to fix anything.
They're nice, obviously, and I apologize again for stating the obvious, but there are nice aspects. It's nice to be able to pay the rent. It's nice to be able to see the world. It's nice to have recognition for what you love to do. But boy, oh boy, whenever anyone expects fame and attention to fix their innermost issues, just history is just littered with people for whom, the process of getting fame has cut their life expectancy by about 80%. Sometimes there are reports on work safety.
Yeah.
And they'll say the most dangerous job in the world is being an Alaskan fisherman. And in terms of life expectancy, the most dangerous job in the world is being a public figure.
It's so true.
And public figures have the shortest life expectancy. Think Amy Winehouse, if she'd never become famous, she probably would have lived to be 70. Kurt Cobain, without fame, he'd probably still be alive. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, John Lennon, on. And Avicii, poor Avicii died killed himself in his 20s.
So what's the catch? What's the safety net, or what's the rope that's going to pull you back in? Because, we're looking at it on a really magnified scale or a public scale of being famous, and it kind of exacerbates things. But I think that there's a correlation between that and everything else. So there must be the rope that you can hang on to pull you out of the shit. And what is that?
That's a great question. I have to think that maybe it's different for different people. Some people, I'm grateful for the fact that I bottomed out completely. Before I got sober 12 years ago, I was suicidal, depressed, anxious, despondent. And I'm grateful for it because it forced me to do the work to try and get better. If I had never bottomed out that way, I never would have been compelled to do the work. But for other people, they don't need to bottom out. Other people, it's just simply having a great, being smart, having a great education, not having an addictive personality, having a good family structure, good friend structure. Like, not everybody needs to get to the place that I got to of like this, suicidal dark night of the soul. So I guess different people are saved by different things. And very sadly, some people simply aren't saved.